stuff whizzing around in increasingly congested space. People are putting up hundreds, thousands of satellites now, particularly in low Earth orbit. You know, so things like Starlink, but there are other satellite services. I mean, I think Elon Musk's ambition is something like 40,000 satellites eventually, isn't it? What happens if, say, we get a major collision that affects that low Earth orbit? What's the consequence of that? I mean, could it sort of spiral out of control?
So if there is a collision, as we've seen a few of already, there was one between a US active satellite and Russian debris in 2009. The Kessler effect is that debris then colliding with other debris or other objects and producing a cascade effect to then make potentially an orbit in low Earth orbit, which is below 2,000 kilometers or below 1,200 miles, unusable. Now, bearing in mind that all of us on Earth, without even realising, probably use at least 30 satellites a day for general activities. You know, our use of space is just absolutely ingrained in our way of life now. And also bearing in mind that some of the very large communication satellites that need to go through low Earth orbit, it would be very hard for them to go through that ring of space debris to go up to their position.
I mean, you described a near miss between satellites. Do you think we will see the Kessler syndrome, if you like, the Kessler effect? Do you think we will see catastrophe if we don't act?
I think if we don't take action now, because I genuinely believe we're at a critical juncture, we could see space sustainability being thoroughly negatively affected. We actually really do need to take action now. To put this into perspective, at the International Telecommunications Union, they have noted that 1.7 million satellites have registered to use radio frequencies in low Earth orbit. 1.7. Now, even if not all of them are launched, and the date for launch is 2030, that is still a significant number of satellites going to low Earth orbit.
Because we are seeing space getting more crowded up.
We are seeing space get hugely crowded, bearing in mind that there are already 9,000 active satellites in space, with many more tens of thousands being registered and licensed, and radio frequencies applied for more satellites to be launched.
Because we've got, I think it's Amazon, we've got companies like OneWeb, we've got Starlink, we've just got all these companies, and they're all scheduled to sort of put a lot of satellites in space. That's their business plan, essentially, isn't it?
The merits of the business plan is to bring, for example, communications around to everyone worldwide. And I think we've seen the benefits of our communications over COVID with telemedicine, tele-education, etc. But we need a balance between availability of communications and protecting the space environment for future generations.
So how do we fix this? What can we do?
If 80% of our activities now are around the private sector, we need to be looking fundamentally to incentivise the private sector to take space sustainability more seriously.
And when you talk about what we might lose if things go really wrong, what are the services that might disappear if the worst case happens and there is an out-of-control series of collisions and there's a serious disruption to space?
Well, we now use outer space in our day-to-day activities more than we ever have. For simple communications, for telemedicine, for education, for banking services. It is so embedded, all of the applications, weather, meteorological aspects, navigation. Our life would be very different without use of satellites nowadays.
That's Professor Joanne Wheeler, who is the director of the Earth and Space Sustainability Initiative. And we'll be talking more about space a little later in the programme. Now, how do you feel when your internet goes down? Is it an inconvenience, or does life get a lot harder? As more of us rely on online services, when when they stop working, it can be a disaster. And according to some experts, it's not just you. Tech outages do seem to be happening more often. Tech Life's Liv McMahon has been exploring what's going on and joins me in the studio. So Liv, what's been going wrong?
Well, there's been a steady stream of companies and services that have been having everything from minor hiccups to huge outages. In the UK, we've seen fast food chains like Greggs and banks like Nationwide recently encounter tech issues. And African countries such as Cameroon and Ghana have recently had internet outages as a result of undersea cable failures. But just last week, we saw a lot of users of WhatsApp and Apple services like the App Store around the world encounter different outages on the same day. Now, these were fairly brief, lasting only an hour or two at most, but we do know from previous experience that the impact of outages like these for services with billions of global users can be massive.
Okay, so here's the sort of million-dollar question. What causes them?
Unfortunately, there's no straightforward, simple answer. There's so many reasons why an app or online service can go down. Experts I spoke to stress that every platform and therefore every outage is different, and no service is 100% reliable. You know, the causes can range from things like human error or faulty hardware to cyber attacks or more complicated problems with the protocols that make up the internet. Last year, I heard from people in Kenya who were impacted by the fallout of a cyber attack on the country's e-citizen portal, which made it really difficult to access some vital services.
My name is Muhammad Onyango, and I live in Nairobi. You couldn't get money from the bank, we couldn't send money, we couldn't receive money. You know, if you maybe want a passport or you were looking for birth certificate for your child, a driving license, and all this kind of stuff, you couldn't get all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we also do still rely on physical infrastructure with severe weather or natural disasters. You know, data centres that need to keep computers cool can fail during heat waves, and earthquakes such as that we saw in Taiwan last week can knock networks offline. Sam Kirkman from cybersecurity firm NetSpy told me that with more firms moving to the cloud to try and meet our demand for easy access to loads of data at once, problems for one provider or in one physical location can have a wider impact.
Moving servers and computers that they would manage themselves in their own buildings and their own offices, and moving them to companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Google who manage all of that infrastructure. That is really good for economies of scale, and it means that a lot of organizations can do more faster than they ever could before. But it also brings together all of these different resources and all of these key components of the modern internet into one location, whether that's a physical location or one particular provider. So what we're actually seeing in a lot of outages is a single outage in, say, a network provider or infrastructure provider, and that cascades across a lot of the platforms and technologies and companies that we use today.
Okay, Liv, we're tech journalists, so yeah, sure, we think these outages are happening more and more often, but is that just our perception as busy tech journalists racing to write these things, or are they actually happening more often?
I know, it does feel like we are writing about these constantly sometimes, but the experts I spoke to as well do think they are happening more frequently. One I chatted to at Ookla, which own Down Detector, a site that so many of us use to track outages or issues when they happen, said they've seen an increase in number of outages and also in user reports when they happen. So while the person I spoke to said that this indicates services aren't just becoming more important and then more alarming when they happen to go down, but also that the internet, in his words, isn't exactly getting more stable. We've got tech giants such as Apple and Meta also having to respond to pressure from regulators to make changes to their sites, and from consumers like us who want more features crammed into these platforms. These companies and ones like them are moving so fast that this might be coming at the risk of breaking things. Sam Kirkman also told me that the internet itself still relies on quite an old fabric of technology, and this may cause some problems in the future, but there is hope.
We're still dependent on technology that was not designed for a world that is connected at a rate that is only increasing. So we've still got some what you might call technical debt, and it affects the whole of the internet. So in that sense, I do think we're going to see some more of these. The flip side, though, or the more positive angle to look at it, is that we have got brilliantly smart people who are learning from all of these different experiences. And what we're increasingly seeing is organizations coming out into the open and saying, hey, here's what happened. not just so that you can understand what went wrong for us, but so other organisations can learn from it.
Sam Kirkman there, ending that report by the ever-reliable Liv McMahon. Well, this is Tech Life, and it's about your life and tech, and we'd really like to hear from you. We've been chatting about outages, and we'd like to know if tech you rely on has ever let you down. How did you cope? You can email us at techlife@bbc.co.uk. You can also drop us a WhatsApp, assuming it's working. The number is +44 330 123 0320. Remember to tell us your name and where you live, and we'll repeat these details at the end of the programme. And still to come on Tech Life, the video game helping children to be less anxious about hospital operations.
With a mixture of curiosity and anxiety, Andy went to the hospital, a place unknown to him, which he wants to begin to discover. And so began his adventure.
Now, do you have a digital camera? Perhaps you have quite a fancy professional-looking one, but no matter how fancy it is, I guarantee it won't be as big as the one our next guest has. The Legacy Survey of Space and Time camera has just been built and has been hailed as the world's biggest digital camera. It needs to be big because when it's housed in its new observatory in Chile, it will help solve some of the darkest mysteries of the universe. I've been speaking to Professor Aaron Rudman of Stanford University's SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory, who led the camera project. He told me just how big the camera is.
It's almost 2 meters across, almost 4 meters long, about the size of the...
In fact, you described its weight. You used an analogy that I thought was quite evocative. You said it was the weight of, what was it, half an African male elephant?
Yeah, it's 3 tons, but yeah. And actually, we worked hard to reduce the weight to that amount, actually.
What I find extraordinary is that when you look at the pictures of it, it actually looks like the lens of a rather expensive sort of professional type camera. It looks like a camera.
It does. When you look through the big lens, you can see the image sensors. And, you know, if you look carefully, you can see a giant shutter. You know, there are some pieces, obviously, that are a little bit different than the camera you might have at home.
How powerful is it?
The capability, you know, that I think is most impressive is how much of the sky we see in every image. So, you know, that's why we need 3 billion pixels, and that's really the key capability.
Yes, people like to brag about how many megapixels their camera is, but 3 billion pixels translates, I think, over 3,000 megapixels, doesn't it?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. You know, I think the other capability, and I don't have quite the number at hand, but in terms of being able to see dim objects, I think we could see a golf ball from, you know, we could just observe it, see it, if it was, you know, illuminated by the sun from, I don't know, you know, the distance of the moon or something. We could see it really, really far away. That's because we have a big telescope too. And that's critical in collecting light, letting us see dim, you know, really dim objects.
A big camera also necessitates a big lens.
The first lens, the camera, is 1.55 meters across. That's 5.5 feet diameter. Actually, we're in the Guinness Book for that lens. It's the largest lens ever built for astronomy. And I can also add that the camera itself is in the Guinness Book listed as the highest resolution camera.
This is going to sit atop a mountain in Chile as part of the Vera Rubin Observatory.
This is a new telescope, new observatory. It's been purpose-built together with the camera. We want to get images of every part of the southern hemisphere sky. You know, so basically what you can see from your mountaintop in Chile. And we're going to do it repeatedly over 10 years. So after 10 years, we'll have seen every part of the night sky almost 1,000 times. And that will let us look for changes. There are exploding stars, there are variable stars, there are galaxies whose brightness change, there are asteroids, there are moving objects, and we hope to see all of those things. And
one of the reasons you need such a big and powerful camera is one of the things it's looking for is almost by definition hard to see. In fact, you could say impossible to see directly. That's dark matter.
that's right, you can't, dark matter, we still don't know what it is, but we do know that there is a lot of it in the universe. There's more dark matter than there is regular matter. And we can see it indirectly. And even light feels the pull of the gravity of dark matter. We expect to see 20 billion galaxies, and all of them will have some small remnant, some small sign that their light has been bent by dark matter.
Are you pretty thrilled to get the images from?
Oh, absolutely. Very thrilled. So, I do have to say we're not, the camera is finished, which is a huge milestone for us. We're sending it to Chile soon. So we still have some work in front of us.
We're used to jaw-dropping photos from new telescopes, but do you think even with all that experience the public will be pretty amazed by what they see from your telescope?
I think so, and I hope so. When you look at our images, you could just scan, basically forever, and just see fields of stars and galaxies, as fast as you can scan across a computer image. So our images are going to be really impressive, but in a different direction, just because you'll be able to see, basically the whole southern sky. And that is different. That is really different.
That's Aaron Rubin of the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory at Stanford University. Hospital operations can be scary, particularly for children, which is why a doctor in Argentina has tried to turn a frightening hospital visit into a fun adventure. Santiago de Matos Lima is not just a medical expert, he's also a video games creator, and he's harnessed his twin skills to create Operation Quest, an interactive video game aimed at children aged 6 to 12 who are about to undergo surgery. Here's a bit of what it sounds like.
Once upon a time, there was a little boy named Andy who was on a very special adventure. One day, Andy felt some minor discomfort, and his doctor, with a smile, told him that he was going to help him feel better. To do this, he would have to operate.
So that gives you a flavor of Operation Quest. Its creator has been telling me how it came about.
My name is Santiago de Matos Lima. I am a doctor. I live here in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I started researching how video games can help people. I found that anxiety previous to a surgery was a very big problem. Here in the hospital, it's a group of psychologists. Many patients go with them to deal with the anxiety. I know how to make video games because I love my hobby. So I made a prototype and I showed to them, and they loved it, and we started to work together to make this game a reality.
So tell me about when children come into the hospital and they're facing an operation. Do you and do the doctors notice that they are very nervous, they are very anxious and fearful?
Yeah, they are very nervous, very anxious, and not always they deal with the anxiety. They deal with the medical, and the anxiety is secondary challenge. So I think that video game that is free and it's available for everyone can help a little bit with information, because the game offers information, and information is described to lower the anxiety of children. If they know what happened and how it happened, it lower the anxiety, not always in the children, but family too. The parents are very stressed, and they pass the stress to the children afterwards. it's a very complicated situation.
So you've got this new game that you've built, and it's called in English Operation Quest. Tell me about the game. What's it like to play?
This game is an adventure game. It's that kind of game. And I thought that this specific type of game was ideal to bring information between gameplay. So I made the story of Andy, that is a child that had to be rated. And he went to the hospital to talk to the doctor about it. And you start playing the game, and in the game, between dialogues and puzzles, you receive that information in a colorful and fun way to chill and to understand what will happen. So that's the game problem.
I've been in pain for days, and today I found out that I'm going to have surgery to heal. I'm a little scared. I want to be strong, but I'm afraid.
I understand how you feel. I'm also nervous, but we can help each other to overcome our fears.
The game, you go through, you collect objects. Some of the objects are scary objects. I imagine if you're a child, I mean, like a syringe,
I was very scared when I was a child. I was syringe too. And the game offers not only you have to collect the syringe, look at it, and when you show it to the doctor, they explain if they will hurt or not, and what you can do to not hurt that much. They offer techniques. You can sing a song with your head. You can take the hand to your mouth.
When you finish the game, do you win something? I mean, is there a sort of, people talk about boss level in games, don't they? You fight the biggest monster, but how does the game end?
This is not that kind of game. This kind of game, you finish the story, the game ends. But many children, when they finish, they want to start it over again. And that's great, because they receive that information again. They choose if they want to receive it or not. It's cool to replay many times.
That's Dr. Santiago de Matos Lima from the Italian Hospital of Buenos Aires in Argentina. And his free game, Operation Quest, is available on both Apple and Android devices. We've reached the end of this edition of Tech Life. Remember to tell us if you've been inconvenienced by an internet or social media outage. And if you want to share how tech is helping your life, we'd love to hear from you too. Our email address is techlife@bbc.co.uk. Or you can WhatsApp us on +44 330 1230 320. Tell us who you are and where you live. You can also send a voice message or leave a text. Today's Tech Life is produced by Tom Quinn, edited by Monica Soriano, and presented by me, Chris Valens.
This is the BBC World Service, and on the food chain this week...
What's the best thing about working with a good friend? I'm Ruth Alexander, and this week I'm going to be talking to restaurateur Ruthie Rogers and Italian chef Gennaro Contaldo about the friendships that helped bring about their professional success.
The food chain at bbcworldservice.com/foodchain. In 50 minutes, witness history.
We're going back to revisit the 40-year rule of General Franco of Spain and hear how the dismembered hand of a saint had spiritual guidance to his dictatorial reign.
Stay with us. Outlook is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Coming up on Outlook with me, India Rakison. In 2021, Evie Marquez was in her late 50s. One day, she was idly scrolling on the internet when she found a report on an institution that she'd been sent to as a child in Austria, and long-buried traumas began to resurface.
I read further. It was kind of like, really? Is that it? Dr. Maria Novak-Vogel. Yes, I think that's her. Once you're confronted with this kind of information, You cannot unhear it. You have to deal with it, or it deals with you.
Journeying back to Austria, Evie uncovers the dark truth behind the doctor in charge and what she did to the children there.
We were undesirables, the outcasts of the society. She treated us like animals. She drugged us with powerful medicines. It was absolutely shocking to learn this. We were her test objects.
Evie's story, after the BBC World Service News.
Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. President Biden has promised to defend Manila from any attack in the South China Sea, where its vessels have been repeatedly harassed by China. Hosting President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the White House, Mr. Biden pledged his commitment to allies in the region. Regan Morris reports.
President Biden said that the U.S. defense commitment to Japan and the Philippines was ironclad, and that the U.S. would defend its allies in the Pacific. His remarks came as he hosted the first ever trilateral summit between the countries amid rising tensions with Beijing. The three leaders called the meeting historic and said that they would hold joint training exercises and bolster economic ties. Multiple Asian countries claim territory in the South China Sea, and China has in the past blamed the U.S. for stoking tensions in the region.
Mexico has asked the UN's top court to suspend Ecuador from the world body over the storming of its embassy in Quito. Mexican officials filed a complaint demanding a public apology for the raid, in which the former Ecuadorian Vice President Jorge Glass was arrested. Here's Will Grant.
It's not completely unheard of. There's been instances where Cuba indeed has gone into an embassy to pull out people that they say were unjustly there and were facing charges, but by and large it's extremely rare. Quite why the Ecuadorian government felt that this was worth doing over this particular case, the President Daniel Noboa has set out his position that the Ecuadorian people, as he put it, wouldn't tolerate impunity for corruption, criminals and narco-terrorists, as he put it at the time.
About 10 million residents of the Colombian capital Bogotá and the areas surrounding it are facing crippling water shortages due to a severe drought aggravated by the El Niño climate phenomenon. Authorities say water supplies will be rationed, as Ione Wells explains.
Bogotá is going to be split into 9 different zones or areas, and each will have to take it in turn to periodically switch off their water services for 24 hours. So essentially, people will be rationing what they're able to use. Now, schools and hospitals are going to have contingency plans in place. They will be exempt from facing to make sure that they don't go without water. But it does mean that for average citizens there, they are going to severely have to kind of limit what water they are able to use.
The UN World Food Programme has warned that its stocks in Haiti could run out in a month as a surge in gang violence over the past weeks is disrupting food distribution. With the capital's international airport and key port closed, the UN has tried to obtain food from local producers, but it says there's not enough. It said the ports needed to reopen immediately and the agency required unimpeded access. Criminal gangs still control much of Port-au-Prince. World News from the BBC. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called on his counterparts in countries from Europe to China to help dissuade Iran from launching a retaliatory strike against Israel. Mr. Blinken has asked them to make it clear to Tehran that an escalation of the conflict in Gaza is in no one's interest. Iran blames Israel for the airstrike on its consulate in Syria that killed 7 military commanders. President Putin has said airstrikes on Ukraine's energy grid, which have caused extensive blackouts, form part of Moscow's attempts to demilitarize its adversary. His comment, made during talks with his ally, the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, came after another wave of Russian strikes against Ukraine's energy facilities. State television in Niger says Russian military instructors have arrived in Niamey to train the national army. It aired footage of equipment being unloaded from a military cargo plane as people in fatigue stood by. One said he was there to develop military cooperation between Russia and Niger. Julian Bedford has more.
Russia's been deepening its involvement in Africa for several years. It has boots on the ground in nations across the Sahel. Until recently, it was Wagner mercenaries who were shoring up regimes. But the team that arrived in Niger late on Thursday were introduced as military instructors operating in an official capacity. It's the latest part of a multi-billion-dollar operation which is ensuring Moscow access to mineral resources. The benefit to some African leaders is obvious, but to their nations, less so.
The US Justice Department has announced it will expand background checks on firearms, requiring anyone engaged in the business of selling guns to register as a federally licensed dealer. It marks one of the most drastic changes to firearms laws in the US in years. The National Rifle Association says it will challenge the law. BBC News.
Hello, I'm India Rakison, and welcome to Outlook, the home of extraordinary life stories on the BBC World Service.
I googled. What came up is the name of the facility. I couldn't believe it. Really? Is that it? That's it. Yes, I think that's the place. I had these memories that I'd never spoken about, and then here they were. Like everything exploded inside of me. I ran out of the house. I wanted to really scream it from the mountaintops.
It's coming now, it's coming.
In one swift internet search, a spectre from the past flashed through Evie Marguez's head. An image of a pale yellow house standing in the shadow of the snow-capped Austrian Alps, high on the slopes of the Inn River Valley. It's been turned into flats now, but its walls hold a terrible secret, one that was kept from the world and from the children like Evie here, who lived between them years ago. Evie is an award-winning photojournalist from Austria, and she's now living in the US. She's been capturing the lives of people with her camera since the 80s, but she's spent most of her life keeping a dark chapter of her own story hidden from view, shut away in her mind, too painful to revisit. She even kept it from a therapist who she credits with saving her life. Only now, in her late 50s, is she opening up. Because this search on the internet a few years ago burst Evie's past wide open, and she had to decide if she could confront it.
Hey Evie, so lovely to see you. How are you doing?
Hi. Good. I'm a bit nervous.
Are you? No, don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. I promise this is going to be very, very relaxed.
Okay. Oh, did it just stop recording?
Oh, did it?
Oh, no. No, it didn't. It just,
okay.
No.
Okay.
Oh.
Her nervousness is so clear, but it's so understandable. She's not spoken much about this publicly, and, well, it's destabilising for her. Evie's in a good place now, and happy, but a word here that what she recounts in this conversation about her childhood is distressing. Her early years, even before we get into the story of the Yellow House, were turbulent, lonely, difficult. When she was born in Austria in the mid-60s, her mother wasn't married, and like in many places at that time, this was a stain on both the mother and the child. Evie was sent away and placed out of foster families, orphanages, and children's facilities. Austria holds little to no fond memories for her, and when she moved to the US as an adult, she vowed never to return or utter a word of German again, in an attempt to keep the difficult memories from resurfacing. But something deep in her bones had been keeping the score.
I'm afraid in the dark, so I just keep the lights on at all hours. And I have this aversion to yellow. When I was in Innsbruck, every child got a color assigned, and my color was yellow. So the color yellow became kind of like that constant reminder of being there. It's a challenge for me to have yellow become my friend. I try to remind myself that it is a color of the sun and of flowers and of light, and just hoping that I get over this aversion.
To try and rewrite the past and take the phobia away, Evie even bought bright yellow sunflowers regularly as an adult. But all that work was eclipsed one day in 2021. She made a monstrous discovery.
My daughter Lily and her friend were in the house in the afternoon, so they were asking me about my childhood. I forget even what exactly we talked about. You know, parts of my past were not a secret. I was generally pretty open and candid about things. But the part of having been in a mental hospital was a secret because it was so dark and unrelatable, really. And then they went on and did whatever they were doing, going upstairs in her room. And having that fresh on my mind, this hesitation, I Googled Sonnenstraße in Innsbruck. I've always remembered the addresses generally of my childhood.
And when you looked it up, you saw a word that you'd not seen before.
Yes.